gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution is not going to get that man today. No, because I'm going to get him.
This is the Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is a manic Monday. It is July 29th, 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann. I'm the co-host along with my son, Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. And folks, you're in for a very special program tonight, 3 hours of unbiased and uncensored news analysis about the current situation, current global financial situation. We've got two very special guests coming up. For those of you listening, new listeners, folks, I just want to say that we are the only show where the news is presented to you in 3 dimensions. We do provide the depth to the news coverage. We look beyond the headlines and bylines and bring in the news behind the news. We broadcast live each and every weeknight. Now, our normal broadcasting time is from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time, except, of course, when it's not. And those are just a couple of days when we have Steve Quell. We broadcast 9 to midnight Eastern Time of those nights because of our very special program tonight. Now, you can find us, new listeners can find us on the internet at HomelandSecurityUS.com. And I want to say, by the way, I just want to welcome new listeners. We received emails personally from new listeners in 24 states, actually, over the weekend. 6 different countries from Europe to the Southern Hemisphere to Australia. I want to say welcome aboard. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your belief and your trust in us as we walk through this minefield of current events together. Joe, welcome to tonight's program.
Very glad to be here. We do have both of our guests, and I'm going to bring them on.
All righty.
Now, bring Steve on first.
Folks, we're in for a great program tonight. We've got Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com and a gentleman known as V, the guerrilla economist, exclusive to Steve Quayle at the moment, exclusive to stevequayle.com. You can find his alerts or his writings at the alert section of stevequayle.com. Gentlemen, welcome to tonight's program.
Good evening, Doug. Good evening, V. Good evening, Joe. And good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about the 4 horsemen of the financial apocalypse. I just want to set something into everyone's thoughts. V, who came on Doug Hagmann's show initially and pretty much exclusively, has been ahead of the curve by so many months that I find it interesting that they'll even quote him word for word, yet there are a few on his sites that obviously give attribution. But I think it's funny because tonight we're going to talk about the Bank of Japan, and V dealt with that before it even became a worry. We're going to talk about the Deutsche Bank. We're going to talk about the ECB, European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, and wherever else we go. The basic monetary maxim or truth for tonight, ladies and gentlemen, if you own a paper-denominated asset, doesn't matter, stock, bond, mutual fund, whatever, that isn't directly tied to a physical unit or commodity, you basically own vapor. And in order for you to understand the most simplest way that I know to take every economic theory that's out there, you can condense it into this, that everything on the planet has a price, the price has been valued, and everything that you think you own is pledged secretly behind your back. All the real estate in America is owned by foreigners. And for the record, all of our national treasures are now surety, if you will, or security, having securitized debt. And the whole Megillah and as in gorilla, Gorilla. We're going to talk about the four monkeys tonight, where people hear nothing, see nothing, do nothing, and absolutely don't want to rock the boat as they're going down with the Titanic, the Lusitania, and every shipwreck, maritime wreck in history. It's all coming to pass. Jim Rogers said the whole economic world is artificial. It's going to end very badly, but why should you pay attention to him? He's only a billionaire. Beware the man on the white horse. He already identified him as a current usurper in the White House. So we're going to talk about things tonight that you've got to get a grasp on. And I'll hit the bottom line right from the beginning, and then I'm going to turn it immediately over to V. God bless you, V. The point that everyone is missing is we're not approaching the end times, we're in them. We're not approaching the financial apocalypse or the revealing, we're in it. And you can stay tied to your own paradigm until you're blue in the face, but the day will come very quick. I asked Doug earlier today, I said, Doug, ask your wife, ask those around you what you would do if you go to sleep on a Friday, you wake up on a Monday, your bank account is closed because there's been a cyber attack. You absolutely have no access to credit. Credit cards are done. Your bank account is shut. All that you have is what you have in your pocket or the precious metals you bought. What could you do? How long could you live? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have been in this world for 4 decades. And the standard of, well, you can't eat gold, well, I got to tell you something. God himself set up just weights and measures. The weights and measures of the living God were accepted from the beginning of time, even from Babylon. There are financial records dealing with gold and silver and the ratio of one to another. When you mess up the measurement, God says that diverse measures are an abomination. And what we now have is a world that has been engineered to financially crash. Everything that is denominated in paper, everything that is of real value is either pledged or securitized or owned by somebody other than you think it. Even the people who think they own their property, own their farm, that's only until the authorities come with a bigger gun and want what you've got. It's been since time began that those with power seek to seize the power. Jim Rogers, beware the man on the white horse. He said as far back as ancient times, whenever civilizations fell into great crisis, people in desperation have almost invariably turned to a single individual who promised them better times. There are people on the internet talking about the white dragons. They're talking about a global reset. That's all horse manure. It will come at the most expensive price anybody could ever imagine. It will be the cost of your eternal soul. Everything out there is pledged, and if you can't touch it, you don't own it. V, tonight before we went on, I got, again, ludicrous emails. I'm not going to burden you with them, but I want you to go tonight, and Doug and I and Joe will listen to the things that God has placed on your heart because you've been so far ahead, and I want you basically just to hit them. And when I say that, with the bottom line from your sources, God has given you favor, God has raised you up, and God has released you. Go ahead, my brother.
Amen. Well, guys, it's great to be back. It's wonderful, and I think the last time that I was on, one of the things I said was, I'm very, very leery about July, and I felt very strongly that there was going to be some massive things occurring in July, and sure enough, you take a step back and you look at what happened just within the last 30 days. It has been monumental, to say the least. You've had a stock market that has continued to fluctuate. You had a large bond sell-off. You had you had Bernanke, for all intents and purposes, being fired, right, where he's like admitting to step down. We've had massive news coming out of the Eurozone with Germany, with Deutsche Bank, with so many things that were occurring. The faith and full trust in the U.S. bond market now is at risk, alongside the Japanese. So many things have happened within July, and I felt very strongly that July was the month of setup, where things are going to start accelerating. And from here on out, we're no longer on the slow train to collapse. We're no longer on the slow train to financial servitude over here. We are right now on the bullet train, and this train is going hyper. It's getting very fast, very quickly. We've seen so much scandals upon scandals with this administration. So it's been very, very news heavy. You've seen the gold beatdown. You've seen the resets with the central banks, with the bullion banks going long on precious metals. We've seen massive amounts of gold and silver all flowing towards the east, going into Southeast Asia and in the Asian economies where they're buying it up feverishly. And you know what? Every single time that me and Steve were on, we're telling you people, get gold, get silver, get it while you can. And sure enough, this is what's occurring. We've seen so much happen, so much occur, and I'm just flabbergasted. And if you had an opportunity to go to Steve's website and look at the alerts that I posted up, especially that alert where I gave a vision that I had, and it was a vision on 90 days. And I think I had that vision July 8th at around 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning. And it was so vivid and so clear. And I saw images of chaos. I saw images of gas stations listing the price of gas at $15 a gallon. I've seen chaos in New York City, people running around in absolute mayhem, cities on fire, martial law declared, the world economic crisis in full fruition, people stupefied as to what to do next or how they're going to get out of this situation. I've seen lines and lines of people waiting online to get food. And on top of all this, the next immediate imagery I've seen was a sky full of drones, was basically the FEMA armored personnel carriers, men dressed in black uniforms with black helmets. And I feel very strongly the voice of the Lord telling me, what do you think all this is for? 90 days. And that's when I wrote down that alert, because when you look at 90 days, folks, 90 days from here, okay, you are looking at basically October. And isn't that amazing that so many things have happened in October? That in 1929, and when I wrote this down in that alert, I had no idea. But that in 1920, and I forgot about it, but in 1929, the collapse occurred in October. A lot of sources that are the top-level economic sources that I've consulted with, they feel strongly about an October, November end to this whole thing, because now it has gone past the point of ridiculous. A few weeks ago, I was talking to a client of mine, and Rick, if you're listening, this goes out to you, buddy. But, one of the questions a lot of people have are, apart from the fact that, is this a cycle? Is this something that's going to be different? And one of the things I said is, you don't have an economy. I'm going to repeat that again. You do not. In the world today, amongst the Western powers, including Japan, you do not have an economy. When Jim Rogers, a man that I respect greatly, said that it is all artificial, okay, he's absolutely right. This is what I've been saying. This is what Steve's been saying. This is what Doug and Joe's been saying. This is what a lot of people have been saying. It is artificial. When you have a central bank that is the primary driver of your stock market, when you have a central bank that is the primary buyer of your treasuries, and when you have a central bank that is the primary sustainer of your real estate market, my friends, you do not have an economy. You have a dilapidated house of cards. And this is what you have not only in the United States, but also in Europe and as well as in Japan. This is the problem that we are facing as a civilization, because now all the central banks, the ECB, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, and the Federal Reserve, the four horsemen of economic apocalypse, are the primary driver of all economic activity in the world today. And when these central banks, that last month in July, we're still in July, I'm sorry, I keep calling it last month, I'm on my head in August already, but in a few weeks ago when the Bank of International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, put out their annual report, and in that annual report they are recommending that all the member central banks stop stimulating. Think about that, folks. Think about that. Ben Bernanke a few weeks ago went on TV and said, we're going to stop tapering. He just briefly mentioned it, said we might. And then what happened? Oh, the stocks took a plunge. While the rest of the world was looking at the stocks, one thing that a lot of people have missed was the dollar. The dollar tanked like you would not believe, just for that instance. And it just shows you how fragile, how hair-triggered we are in this country, in this quote-unquote economy we're living in. So much has occurred in July. So much has been revealed in July. And then in tonight's broadcast, I want to try my best to paint a picture for you guys, to show you in detail how we got here. When I was a young trader back in 2005, I was under the tutelage of that time of a gentleman from South Africa. I'm not going to name him because then I'll give it away too quickly. But this man was the #1 strategic metals trader in the world. He was so good he retired at the age of 30. Till this day, he is called by the House and the Senate to go forth and testify upon markets and commodities. So when he took me under his tutelage to head up strategic metals in this European commodity house that I worked for, and I handled the logistics, the refining process, every aspect of the trade, from the ground to the market, from Zimbabwe to South Africa, trading it through Zurich and through the Netherlands. The man would always tell me something, and him, as well as the cohorts and the men that were in the circles that he rolled with. And the thing that he always said is, V, your country is bankrupt, and they would laugh. And a young trader like myself, I never understood, what do you mean we're bankrupt? And he would always smile at me and said, one day you'll understand. And sure enough, folks, those words ring true more than ever. Some of you might be thinking that we've been bankrupt as a nation. Oh, maybe in the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. But what these men were talking about, these cadre of elites, these power brokers of the world, no, this bankruptcy, what these men are talking about, this going into receivership that these men laughed about over cocktails, goes much farther back than a mere 15 or 20 years. It goes way back. And tonight's broadcast, I'm going to paint a picture for you guys of how we got here. Because this country's history from the beginning has been a history of the struggle against the bankers. Behind every human tragedy in the last 300 years, there has been a banker behind it. In the great deal of human sufferings, just in the last 100 years, there has been a group of bankers behind it. These are the men that are above your military-industrial complex. These are the men situated and seated above your politicians and elected officials. These are the men that are in charge of your media. These are the men who steer nations, who fund both sides, who direct and manipulate the outcome of each and every event. And you will see tonight, folks, by the grace of Almighty God, that the hand, the invisible hand of these men working in the background since the time of this country's birth till today. And that's the one thing that I want you guys to realize, and that's the one thing we're going to go into. Steve, you want to say something?
Amen, V. Thank you very much, by the way. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann Report, the exclusive interview with Steve Quayle and V, the guerrilla economist. I tell you what, it is so important what you said, V. I didn't mean to interject here, Steve, but I got to tell you something. Everything, and this is something I had a conversation with an intelligence insider just before the show, who said that the lie is so big, and everything you just said, honest to goodness, everything you just said could have, the conversations could have been interchanged. It is that big. We are living the lie, a lie people are not seeing. In fact, Syria, Libya, the Arab Spring, if you look at the reasons behind it, it's not military necessarily. It is a banking instituted operation by the very people you're talking about. Steve, go ahead.
Well, first of all, Jesus made it really clear that the love of money, not money, the love of money is the root of all evil. I've also said the control of money is the control of all evil. When I made this statement years ago, this is what the Lord has prompted me to say, and I'm going to say it. He said, tell my people tonight, Steve, and listen, there are thousands of people who are interceding for me, and God bless each and every one of you. God bless each and every one of you, because that's the reason that the Lord has called me to be a watchman. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm just doing what He's called me to do. He said, tell them that the new revelations coming out are of my doing. You know, Doug, I get a kick out of the fact that people are trying to claim that Snowden's a traitor. Of course, the people that are trying to claim him a traitor are the ones that got caught with their not only hands in the cookie jar, but their pants down, and they're caught with their pants down in compromising situations. The Lord God of heaven, hallowed be His name, declared years ago, before America is destroyed, He's going to reveal the sins of the leaders to the people and the people's sins before their God. The two greatest sins in the body of Christ right now are apathy and indifference. Apathy and indifference lead to cowardice. But what I'm seeing, and V will address this tonight, I am seeing such financial cowardice where people tell me they've got tens of millions of dollars, and literally they do, at risk, and yet they're saying, I'm too afraid to do anything. And I said, every day you do nothing means you're going to lose it. And I'm not kidding, Doug. People with great wealth, and I'm not talking, this is important to understand. People who have been given great wealth don't understand that God holds them, if they're Christians, responsible and accountable for what we do. It's a parable of the talents. The talent isn't whether you can sing. The talent isn't whether you can write. The talent isn't anything more related than that God has said, I'm going to give you unrighteous mammon to see how you handle it in order to be able to give you the true riches. That's the parable. That is the word of the Lord. Those are object lessons for us to learn. It is absolutely astonishing to me that the people of God who go to church on Sunday still go to the devil's cauldron on Monday through Friday and live in a world of artificial reality, virtual reality, paper money, credits, electrons, photons, and morons, okay? That's the way Pastor Langford would say it, morons, because if you're living in a virtual world where your wealth, you can't eat electrons. You can't eat neutrons, and you certainly can't eat protons. Well, actually, ladies and gentlemen, those of you on the West Coast eating seafood are going to be eating more than you can imagine. The old adage is that you might glow in the dark. Well, you may not glow in the dark, but the stuff in the ocean that's affecting the plankton and the food chain is not only glowing in the dark, it's mutating in the dark. And just as things in the creation of the world that God set barriers for, God made gold and silver. From the beginning, He said the gold of Ophir is good. And this is what V's people who He has been placed in contact, these are movers and shakers, ladies and gentlemen. I know their names, not because I would have known them outside of V telling me, but also some of them are recognizable when He tells you. God is giving you behind the veil look. tonight, if any of you go to bed and send me an email tomorrow and say, what should I do with my IRA, 401k, defined benefit plan, and you have not done anything yet with it, then I would say to you that you are already sleeping in the dust of the earth, because you do not understand the brevity, you do not understand the danger, you do not understand the flood that's coming against you. And I mean, I know people that are prayer warriors and intercessors, and when they ask the Lord, what should I do about my retirement? He says to them, don't worry, it won't matter if you stay where you're at. And then he says, why will you perish, O man? So, ladies and gentlemen, personal accountability and responsibility. V is absolutely sounding the clarion call. I know of no one else in the world, and I know a lot of people. I know of no one else, and it's interesting, Doug. They said that, imitation is the highest form of flattery? Well, outright intellectual theft seems to be the higher form of flattery. Because didn't you tell me, Doug, that you've seen posts where when anybody says, well, Quayle was right or V was right, they automatically want to brand that person as a crazy or a follower? Tell me, everyone listening to this broadcast, who was it that told you about the Japanese yen, V? Who was it that told you about Deutsche Bank, V? Who was it that told you 5-7 years ago, whatever it was, longer than 7 years ago, that God was going to reveal the sins of leaders? And now you have secret meetings of former presidents and the current president and Africa. And let me just tell you this. These guys are not having normal bowel function because they know what's getting ready to come out. That's why the paratroopers, the Russians, that's why the Chinese, everybody in the higher echelons knows what's getting ready to happen to the United States of America. And you cannot blame those who have loaned money to the United States and taken collateral positions, because God is absolutely going to judge and punish the Western financial system, because it's built on unjust measures, it's built on death, it's built on war, it's built on nothing but bloodshed, and it has been nothing but a machine devouring the people, the planet, and that blessing that God intended for his people when they walked in his way. It should make everybody weep on their face before God that 80% of Americans no longer can pay their bills. It should make everybody cry out, what went wrong? I'll tell you what went wrong. NAFTA, CAFTA, it became the SHAFTA. I remember I was one of the first guys that even made that thing rhyme, and that was, 10 years ago, at least 15 years ago, whenever. And the point being is this. Tonight you're getting a behind-the-scenes view. And V, I haven't had a chance to talk to you, Doug or Joe. Before I went on the show tonight, I got a call from someone, and I do not know the person's name. I know the person that called me. I don't know the name. But he said he's assigned to a missile wing. And they've been good friends for all this years. And he came into my friend's store and simply said, it's later than you think. It's never been this dangerous. We hear of the Russians. We hear of the Chinese moving. We hear of the challenges. We hear a president claiming that Ho Chi Minh was reading Thomas Jefferson and was a follower of the Founding Fathers. Not one of the Founding Fathers killed 500,000 of their own people or killed 60,000 Americans. And still today, veterans from the Vietnam War, God bless each and every one of you, walk around with wounded hearts, wounded bodies, missing limbs, minds so tormented, tortured, poisoned by Agent Orange. And if that doesn't make you vomit, I suggest that you don't even know what the word living means. That should make you furious that a group of men that laid down their lives, and what V's going to lay out to you is this. They believe they were fighting for liberty. It was all a mind control experiment to control not only the population of America, but to get control of the drug trade. Am I not right there, V?
You're absolutely right. Vietnam is just one of the many banker wars. Okay, the first banker war. Let me tell you something about this. In the last 300 or so years, we've had a creature emerge from the abyss. And that creature is the banker. He is the one, and his method, his primary method, is fractional reserve lending, okay? That's his primary method. And now, you know, people would always say to me, well, V, wasn't that something that was created by the Rothschilds? No. It actually was created by King Henry V. All right? The first instance of fractional lending was created by Henry, who took all the gold from all the goldsmiths, because back then, merchants, merchants would keep their gold with the goldsmiths, and their silver with the goldsmiths, and the goldsmith would just give them a certificate. Some goldsmiths were a little dishonest, and they gave out more certificates than they had gold. Okay, but the greatest offender of all this was King Henry, I think V. And what he did was he confiscated all the gold because, you know, he's in an expansionary war, and then started says that, you know, he's going to pay back everybody's debt, and, you know, wrote a whole bunch of certificates that he didn't have the gold to back up that claim. Eventually, suffice to say, to make a long story short, he paid back all the gold. But that spurred the idea to Mr. Rothschild, and he became your first real multinational banker. And how did he do that? Well, he started banking left and right. We all know the story, how he, you know, he had one of his spies follow Napoleon into battle. And when he lost the Battle of Waterloo, he said, you know, the spy, responded back saying that Napoleon, the Russians won, and what happened was the spy went back, the stock market in England crashed, and then Rothschild bought up everything on the penny on the dollar. But the thing is this, folks. Rothschild and the whole banking conglomerate of the Rothschild family exists and has always existed under the auspices of the British Royal Crown. When we talk about, when traders, you know, we called Wall Street as young traders, we called it the Terror Dome. And we'd always say, welcome to the Terror Dome. And that's, you know, that was the melee where the world traded. But the real traders, we always knew, the real brokers knew, the real powerhouse in finance was not Manhattan, was not Wall Street, New York City. No. The real powerhouse in finance is the city in London. Okay? We are under a British banking model system. It is a British banking system that we have been fighting in this country since 1776. How do we come to a revolutionary war? Most people would think that it was over tea, or a tax on tea, and there's no taxation without representation. Folks, it was much more than that. The Revolutionary War was the first banker war fought in the New World, okay? The British banksters made it economically impossible for those that are in the colony to live in peace, that they rebelled. And it was these banksters that they were the main agitators of what occurred that caused America to have this revolutionary war, and eventually we won our freedom. If you look at the letters that men like Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, Washington, what these men wrote about, you notice that there's a common theme. They are wary of central bankers. They are wary of international bankers. They are wary of these money changers. Okay? So when the Brits, when these banksters lost the New World, because there was a lot of investment going into America, because believe it or not, folks, they thought it is. You got to understand, these banksters, you know, at the low to mid level, these guys are ruthless. They are a soulless creature, and I've been around some of them. They have no loyalty to country, to culture, tradition, borders, land. It doesn't matter. All that matters is profit. They have no God. Their God is mammon. But above that, okay, that's also what I've been exposed to. When I saw some of when I was working as a broker for another firm, when I saw the chairman and individuals chanting Babylonian prayers before the market opened. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. A couple of years ago, as a young broker, I just thought you guys were a bunch of atheistic, nihilistic, dirtbags who just want to make a buck. But now I'm seeing, wait a minute, at the higher level, there's some sort of a religion here. There's some sort of a belief here. Folks, these banksters at the top level have a special belief that Amaruka, and that's the name of this country, it's the land of the serpent, has a very special place in their heart. They believe that this mystical land is theirs. So when we first landed, when the early colonists first landed here, there was a great deal of tremendous investment by the money bankers to get a foothold here. And when that did not occur, what happened? Well, they came at us a second time. And that, friends, was the War of 1812. When we lost Washington, we lost the White House, the Brits burned it down to the ground, and then we still repelled them. Okay? So again, the banksters failed. Then the banksters realized that they couldn't get a hold of this country by force. Because they couldn't do it by force, they have agreed to do it by subterfuge. Fast forward, okay, to the mid-1800s, right before the Civil War. You know, oftentimes people ask me, well, V, we need a Reagan to turn this country around. And I look at people dead in the eye and say, no. You don't need a Reagan. Reagan had his puppet masters, especially his chief of staff, who was a Goldman Sachs plant. Now, what we need in this country today to turn this thing around, apart from Almighty God, is you need a man like Andrew Jackson. Now, people would say, you know, there's a lot of history books written about Andrew Jackson. But I will tell you something from the bankster's perspective. He was one of the most feared men because, believe it or not, Jackson was very economically astute. He was very smart. He studied the booms and the busts that happened right after the War of 1812 because we went through a boom cycle and bust cycle. He understood the concept and how the currencies would work and how the banknotes would work. And he went through and he studied economics through what's called the currency school at that time. And it's from him and his group that they were called the Jacksonians. And these men, what do? They fought against the first bank of the United States. I'm sorry, the second bank of the United States, because the first bank failed, the first attempt to set up a central bank. So the second bank of the United States, he fought against. Nicholas Bedell was the central banker that he went up against. And they defeated him. And Jackson had multiple assassination attempts on his life. And towards the end of his life, not only did he get America out of all the debt that was poured onto her by the bankers because of the wars, not only did he balance the budget, on his deathbed, it was said that somebody asked him, what's your greatest achievement? He said, I killed the bank. His greatest achievement. And God bless him for that, because he understood. Just like Tom Jefferson, who said that if you allow these banks to control the currency and the money of this country, the banks and the corporations that will grow up around them will rob you of the land that your fathers have fought and died for. And so Jackson understood that. So fast forward to the third banker war, which was the Civil War. And folks, people tell me, well, you know, you need a central bank. No, you don't. How do we operate prior to 1913? How do we operate prior to 1861? You know, yeah, people say, well, you know, some of these historians will tell you, they'll do this brainwash where you've had banks and they print their own banknotes and, you know, and they had less gold than the notes that they wrote. And they couldn't redeem these notes, so again, doing the whole fractional reserve, you know, the song and dance. Because that's exactly what's happening, folks, because there's something about these banksters. They can't get away from printing paper. It's just something that's genetic in them. They just can't get away from it. So even in the midst of all this, you had banks fail. The beauty of it is the banks would fail. Their assets were liquidated. Okay? That's the beauty of it. We don't have that system anymore. All right? We have too big to fail banks these days. So, but in the 1800s, there was a bank in New England, and during the time of the other bust cycle that occurred in the 1850s and early on into the 1860s before the Civil War, not a single New England bank went under because of a bank called the Suffolk Bank. And the Suffolk Bank is proof positive that a private bank working in a pure free market system is safer, more efficient, and more profitable for the public to use. It was the perfect clearing bank. It worked better than any other bank in the region, any other bank in the country. That immediately before, as soon as the Civil War started, what did the banksters do? Well, in 1861, they killed the Suffolk Bank. How did they do it? They passed a law in 1861, right before the Civil War kicked off, the Banking System Act of 1861, which prevented any bank from issuing its own note redeemable in specie, which is either gold or silver. Setting up, that Banking Act of 1861 set us up for a pure central bank fiat concept that was implemented in December 23rd, 1913. So as soon as 1861 rolled around, the Civil War gets kicked off. How the heck do we fund the Civil War? Well, Lincoln and the Treasury Secretary at that time, Salmon P. Chase, they issue greenbacks. And as soon as the greenbacks hit the market, they become worthless almost. They're not trading there. They're very volatile. Let's understand, we got a war going on. But as soon as the war was settled, the central bankers, and the funny thing with Salmon is this, Salmon P. Chase was the Jacksonian. He understood currency. He understood the dangers of these banksters. But yet, at some point in his career, he became a turncoat. The banksters got a hold of him, paid him off, and made him into the Secretary of Treasury under Lincoln. And under Chase, right after the war was over, the greenback started falling rapidly. It started depreciating rapidly. Inflation started growing up. You know what Chase did? And I want to know, and let me know, folks, if this sounds familiar. The first thing Chase did, guess what he did? He started blaming gold. He started to blame the gold and silver speculators. And so, he tried to destroy, personally, the gold market. Gold is like kryptonite to these banksters because it forces them, it adheres them to very strict and stringent standards and measures. And that's something they can't have because power corrupts, folks, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, that whole opposite, Chase tried multiple times to destroy the gold market. He tried so much that in the end, Chase was eventually booted out of his office. He was fired. They kicked him out. Told him to go take a hike. And in fact, it was, and I want you to listen very carefully, it was in fact a Republican senator from that time who nailed it. He said this. He said, his name is Jacob Collamer, the senator from Vermont. And his words ring so true today because of the economic situation that we're in. And he said this. He said, gold does not fluctuate in price because they gamble in it. The fluctuation is not in gold. The fluctuation in price is in the currency. The currency fluctuates. And it's this fluctuation that is utterly beyond the control of individuals. Think about that for a second, folks. This is why V has always told you, buy gold, don't worry about the spot price. Buy silver, don't worry about the spot price. If it's up, buy it. If it's low, buy it. If it's medium, buy it. If it's a good day, the birds are singing and the sun is shining, buy it. Because it's not the metal that's fluctuating. I need you guys to get that. I need you to understand that. It is the currency that's
V,
fluctuating.
if I can interject something here, V, and I apologize for interrupting, but I got to tell folks, on HomelandSecurityUS.com, if you just simply look on the second page, there is, you've got to understand this, because 99% of the questions I'm getting by email right now can be answered in this one video. It's on the second page of our website. Is simply this. If you scroll down to the bottom of the second page, money versus currency, understanding the difference. It's a 28-minute video. It's really simple. Money versus currency. There is a difference, folks. Please, all of your questions that we're getting here, what V's talking about, can be answered. So money versus currency, understanding the difference. You can even look it up on YouTube. It's a 28-minute video. But I just want to interject that, V.
No problem. No problem anytime. But that's the situation, folks. So the Civil War goes off. The banksters try to get a central bank up and running again. Doesn't really work. You have a greenback issue, massive inflation, massive unemployment, and then you get the industrial age. And what do these banksters do? Well, they need to set up a central bank. All right? So they do it. They bought out Nelson Aldrich, senator from the great state of New York, Paul Warburg, and we all know the whole, you can look it up yourself on the internet, though I'm not going to waste my time on the creation of the Fed. You can look it up, the whole Jekyll Island thing. And they create the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve needs to create more power. How do you do that? Well, what does the Fed do? They create boom and bust cycles, just like the first bank of the United States, just like the second bank of the United States, just like every other central bank. Okay? They do another boom bust cycle. They print a ridiculous amount of cheap currency and cheap credit, and then they contract the monetary supply, causing all these bubbles that they've created to explode. This is why those who are in the Kool-Aid and drinking party that is partying it up on Wall Street had a heart attack when the Fed chairman said we're thinking about tapering. It is the same thing. So when you stimulate and you put this flood of cheap money out there, you inadvertently or advertently create many, many bubbles. The problem with these bubbles is that the moment you begin to taper, the moment you decide to tighten the reins a little bit, those bubbles pop. And what happens to all those wealth? No, folks, the wealth that is created by these bubbles, the assets that are propped up by these bubbles, they don't disappear. No. This gets siphoned into the banksters. So they need to create turmoil. What do? Well, they dragged us into the first banker world war, World War I. They tried to push hard. They created a League of Nations. They said millions of people died. They did. It was horrible, they said, and it was. And then their solution was to ramrod a world government down our throats at that time. And didn't really fly. League of Nations fell apart. It just became a debate society, and it had no legs. But the Federal Reserve became stronger. And then in 1929, they contracted the monetary supply again, this time causing a massive, massive crash. And to the stock market crash in 1929. So what was the first? Again, you're seeing these Hegelian problem reaction solution that many of the listeners are familiar with. So what was the Fed solution to the problem they created? In 1933, get rid of gold. Take America, reevaluate everything. And in 1933, folks, when I was hanging out years ago, when these guys, these top traders, these top brokers, these top fund managers, these top guys, these power brokers who ran the show, when they talked about America was bankrupt, this is what they're talking about. Because in 1933, okay, That was, believe it or not, not only the fact that the gold was confiscated, but 1933 kicked off the fact that we, as a country, went into bankruptcy. The Emergency Banking Act was passed. Okay? The Emergency Banking Act, Statute 1, Public Law 89-719, which was declared by President Roosevelt, that the U.S. was bankrupt and insolvent. We went into receivership. Okay? Also, another thing happened. Not only were we bankrupted, folks, you know, today people ask me all the time, well, what about my mortgage? What about my land? What about this? You don't own it. You can have a paid-off mortgage. You can have a paid-off piece of property. And people are like, well, if I pay it off, don't I own it? No, but we'll stop paying your property tax, and you'll find out real quick who owns your property. You see, folks, in 1933, we lost something as a nation. We lost our property rights. That was the end of all allodial titles. Allodial titles is something that our founding fathers have set up for this republic. In fact, the old American axiom was not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No, no, no. The original mantra, folks, was life, liberty, and the ownership of property. The government existed for the enforcement of contracts and the preservation of property rights. And in 1933, we've lost that. It was the end of all allodial titles. And allodial means total and absolute claim and ownership to the land without any taxation, without any fees. It's totally gone. At that point in 1933, when you read closer to how the bankers set it up, they also made sure that all the governmental offices and the departments are now owned outright by the bankers. So if the government is owned by the bankers and we went into receivership then, how does the government function? Simple. The government functions simply on a War Powers Act. People ask me, well, V, what do you mean by that? Most of you that are listening to my voice who are 60 and even 70 years old, folks, let me tell you something. This country has been at war for your whole entire life. Think about it. For as long as you have been alive, we have been at war. World War I, World War II, which set us up for Korea, all the assets and armaments didn't just get shipped back to the continental U.S., folks. No, no, no. It was stationed offshore. And the banksters set out Vietnam, which was to corner the drug trade. What do you think we went into Afghanistan for? Freedom? Tim Osman, a.k.a. Osama bin Laden? No. Opium. What was the biggest mistake the Taliban did? Hiding Osama bin Laden? No, 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 no. The biggest mistake, there's two big mistakes that the Taliban did. Number one, they rejected the Caspian pipeline for oil. Because the banksters need to have oil. And the oil companies and cartels function. All the oilmen function underneath the banksters. Same thing with the military industrialists. The second big mistake the Taliban did is they started hacking down and cutting down all the opium trees, all the opium plants. Not trees, I'm sorry, but the opium plants. Couldn't have that. So we went in, and what is the first thing that happens? Well, Afghanistan today accounts for 93 or 95% of all the world's heroin. That's what I call spreading freedom, folks. That's what your taxpayer dollars are doing. And in fact, your taxpayer dollars, every penny of your taxpayer dollar goes back to paying the interest that this country owes to the Federal Reserve. So when this economy finally goes bust, you will have nothing. Your house that you live in is imaginary. The land you live in is imaginary. It will be collateralized. In fact, it is already being collateralized because the Fed has made the U.S. bond and the U.S. dollar a worthless asset What do you think we're going to be giving the Chinese and the Russians? Your land and your houses. That's what they're going to do. And due to the receivership, the never-ending borrowing in the United States in order to exist has been a perpetual War Powers Act. I want you to think about this, folks. If you look at Roosevelt's executive orders, Executive Order 6073, Executive Order 6102, Executive Order 6111, Executive Order 6260, all this was giving the bankers the rights to the land. The same banksters who set up the United Nations in New York City. The same banksters who are funding what you're going to see with this economic collapse, folks, is the biggest land grab in history. That's right. It's not just the subprime mortgages. It's not just the guy who's struggling to keep his house, struggling to pay his mortgage payment. No. It's going to be your very home. Because your home and the land that it's on is going to be seized because it is collateral. You, my friend, people ask me, well, let me ask you this. Look, here's something for the bankers to you. Do you know what those FEMA camps are for? Do you know what those camps are about? Of course, there's going to be red lists, blue lists, and yellow lists. But you know there's another type of camp, which are work camps. You know what those work camps are for, folks? It's for you. That means one day you're going to get up. A van's going to pull up. It's going to take you to one work site. It's going to take your wife to another work site. Oh, and it's not going to pull up in your house, by the way. It's going to pull up at that camp you're staying in. It's going to take you to a work site. Your wife will be in another, and your children will be in another. And you're going to work to pay back the national debt that you owe, or at least what the bankers think you owe. This is something that the bankers want to do to you guys. You are the collateral. Your house, forget the house, I don't even care about the house, the land that it's on is the collateral. That's what they're going to do. This is what's being given over to the Russians, over to the Chinese, over to certain Europeans as collateral, because we are a captured operation, because we are in receivership. And now we can no longer be at war perpetually because we're going broke. That's where we are today. Steve or Doug? If you guys want to say anything.
Steve, go ahead.
Okay, well, here's what has to settle in tonight. It will be a literal act of God to grant wisdom. Pastor Langford quoted it yesterday in the book of James, last night when we were on, that if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men generously. The number one question I get asked every day, what about my mortgage? What about my credit card bill? What about everything? Pastor Langford gave almost a year ago the word of the Lord, where the United States has been in bondage, and bondage is debt, and debt is bondage. Now we're going into captivity. What V is laying out to everyone is the plan. You are not your own. You have a choice to stay in their system or yield to Jesus, because you're bought with a price. And it's so hard. I pray that people understand this, Doug, that you become chattel, your person. And you think I'm crazy? Somebody's already got my DNA, and I'm sure someone owns a patent to my DNA. But I would just like to remind them that when the children of Israel were eating manna, which was angel food, they started complaining about the same old thing. And then God sent them quail, spelled differently, but they vomited. They wanted meat. What I've learned in having to gauge what I share or time what I say is that most people simply cannot digest the meat of the word. They're still suckling. I know people that are basically Christians. They've got growing children living at home, and they're still breastfeeding. They're 34 and 36. So I don't mean literally. I mean figuratively. The point is that God is saying, grow up. The whole purpose of last night, Doug, ties into tonight perfectly, because it's not just a spiritual issue, it's a physical issue. It is the issue of whose property are you? You know, the thing that is critical for people to understand is this. The foreign troops brought into this country are here to enforce under the rule of world law to basically collect on their dues. Just like the mafia sends the boys out, when you borrow money from them and don't repay, you get something broken. Well, in this case, the whole country has been whored out, W-H-O-R-E-D, sold out, betrayed out, given up, given out, given over, and very soon it's going to hit home. And these being kind, the idea of men and women living together in the camps, you, ladies and gentlemen, hear me. Take this to the Lord in prayer. You are collateral. You have become chattel. You young ladies that focus on Facebook, or all you that are building your own Central Intelligence Agency dossiers, all of you that are children of the Stasi, all of you that basically think that this technology is such a great thing, you're already hooked into the Borg. And by being hooked into the Borg, you are being specifically brain drained and brain trained away from the truth. V just laid out to you what the banker's end game is. As one very wealthy man once said to me, he said, Steve, he said, after a point, even Ted Turner said this, he said, power is better than sex. Well, this guy told me point blank, that's, by the way, a quotation of Ted Turner's. This guy said, Steve, when you get all the money in the world, he said, the only thing you wake up for is more power. He said, it's like a bloodlust. I said, so when I see a story on Drudge today, that the Pentagon wants people to listen to them to the way things are, not read the headlines on Drudge, I said, and I wrote this on one of my commentaries, just in one sentence, that's like asking a vampire to give up drinking blood, and they're going to give you red Kool-Aid in spite of the blood. Guess what? Vampires drink blood. The point is that what you have just heard, ladies and gentlemen, is what is in play now. When we come back from the break, Doug, we'll take this even further, because we're in a critical mode. V's time frame, Pastor Langford's time frame, everybody's time frame. And look, they're not setting a day or an hour. What they're saying is everything is in preparation. Everything in martial law has been kicked up. When you got missile guys that are in the silos ready to launch nukes, worried and saying their goodbyes, something's going on. Ladies and gentlemen, if you act, my guess is, and look, I can be wrong, my guess is that the time to act will be taken from you if you wait much longer than 3 to 4 weeks. So please, when we come back from the break, we'll get into specifics. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, V.
All right.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. A fantastic first hour, folks. You're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this, the 29th day of July, 2013. Very special guest, Mr. Steve Quayle, stevequayle.com. V, the guerrilla economist, who, by the way, the last time he was on, caused many people to quote him, and also he's quoted in several from the Economist to other publications on the internet. So it's extremely important news. It's tomorrow's headlines today. We'll be right back after these messages. Stay with us. And by the way, money versus currency, understanding the difference, I put it up on front, top of the website at HomelandSecurityUS.com.